There are many locations on planet Earth where one can go and find old, broken-down vehicles that have been forgotten and await their fate. There are also many locations where vehicles sit and wait to be scrapped and become spare parts, or at times make it out whole in a sale. There are a combination of both, the graveyards dedicated to the defunct and the decrepit. This is Incredible Vehicle Boneyards around the world. Number 10. Nouadhibou Ship Graveyard. Mauritania is one of the poorest nations in all the world, and it is there where we find our next vehicle resting place. Nouadhibou is the second largest city in the country with a population near 100,000, and there is where the graveyard itself lies. Sometime in the 1980s, the locals started to abandon their unwanted and outdated boats and ships in the bay near to the town, and before long, unwanted vehicles from all over the world were brought there and left forever. There have been measures taken to halt the abandoning of ships, but they continue to show up and stay there. It doesn't help that early on, local authorities would take bribes to just look the other way and let people leave their unwanted ships in the bay, and once a habit is formed, it's tough to quit. The plan given in 2001 by the Mauritanian government was to create an artificial reef for wildlife from the ships in deeper waters, but nothing has been done to follow through since. Number 9. Train Graveyard. Located not far southwest of Bolivia, one will find Salar de Uyuni, and within that, there sits a graveyard. No, not a graveyard that holds human remains, but one where you'll find the skeletons of old trains and train parts. The resting place for locomotives was not always an abandoned and creepy place. In fact, back in 1888, the mining industry in the area was booming, and that led British engineers to construct a railway that spanned all the way down to the Pacific, which took 4 years and was completed in 1892. The building of the railway was not always easy though, as yes, it was encouraged by the Bolivian government, but it was hated by the local indigenous people, who sabotaged it every chance they got. In the 1940s, as the minerals in the area were depleted and wore thin, many of the trains used in the operation were abandoned, and we have what we see now today. There have been proposals to build a museum from the trains found in this interesting resting place, but as of now, no moves to do so have been made. Number 8. Oraniamund Diamond Vehicle Scrapyard. Well, this one is kind of scary. Did you know that in Namibia there's a town called Oraniamund that's owned entirely by a company named Namdeb, which is a joint venture between the De Beers Diamond Cartel and the Namibian government? We didn't know either. The town sits not far from substantial diamond reserves near the mouth of the Orange River and was built to house the workers of the mine. Workers do attempt to sneak diamonds out, which comes with a 15-year prison sentence, and some have been caught trying to smuggle them up their noses, and some even try to shoot them over the perimeter fences with homemade crossbows. A pigeon was once caught wearing a jacket stuffed full of diamonds, so you can see that these workers will do pretty much anything to get some for themselves. Vehicles aren't allowed to leave the mine compound once they enter, and this makes for quite the collection of old broken down cars, trucks, and pretty much any other type of earth-moving vehicle you can think of. Some of the machines date back to the 1920s, so the whole never leaving thing is no joke. There are even tanks from the Second World War rusting away here, as even those weren't allowed out. At one time, company executives loved to show off their collection, but they now forbid photographs of it, perhaps because of the negative public image that came with the sight of hoarding the vehicles. Number 7. Barry Scrapyard. A whole bunch of steam locomotives was once found rotting away in Barry, South Wales at the Woodham Brothers Scrapyard. The trains come from British Railways, who, in 1955, decided they would scrap a massive amount of its locomotive and wagon fleet, but were unable to undertake the entire ordeal on their own and sold to private scrapyards to get the job done. Di Woodham, the owner of the Woodham Brothers, decided in 1965 to focus on scrapping the wagons that were coming into the yard rather than the steam locomotives, and the trains were left to rust and decay right out in the open. The location quickly became a tourist attraction, and many train enthusiasts caught wind of the place, where rare locomotives were just waiting to be bought up. The rescue of these steam locomotives began in 1968 and continued throughout the 70s and beyond, and in 2013, the last steam locomotive was bought and removed from Barry. In total, 213 steam engines were purchased and saved, and the scrapyard is no longer filled with the historic trains. Happy ending for this one. Number 6. Motorcycle Boneyard in New York. If you were headed up to Lockport, New York a few years ago and found yourself at the Erie Canal, you would have seen an old warehouse that had a surplus of old motorcycles just withering away. A man known as Cole has supposedly owned a bunch of motorcycle dealerships throughout his lifetime, and over time, he purchased more bikes than he knew what to do with. This led him to buy the warehouse previously mentioned to store his prized bikes, and he sold it off, bikes included, in 1997. The buyer then wanted to use the warehouse to sell parts for motorcycles. However, the building had begun to crumble, and the said buyer just couldn't justify repairing it, and local authorities condemned it in late 2010. The motorcycle collection was cleared out and more than likely sent to scrap, but a photographer named Chris Seward managed to post pictures from the graveyard earlier that year, and many bike enthusiasts were able to buy spare parts and whole bikes just in the nick of time. Number 5. Kola Peninsula. Way up in the far north reaches of Russia, one can find Nezametnaya Cove inside the Arctic Circle, and it is there where a watery graveyard for Soviet submarines can be located. Sometime in the 1970s, many military subs were brought here and abandoned in a cove on the peninsula, and that's kind of scary considering some of them, many of them, were nuclear powered. This just goes to show that apparently the shipyards in the Soviet Union were so busy producing new submarines, they weren't super concerned with disassembling the old ones, thus this place. Either that or they were too busy or too lazy, we don't know. But either way, they left these hulking subs to rot and rust in the waters of the area. Information on the nature of the place is limited considering there's no access to the area without first obtaining a permit, and even then you're likely not to find out much. In the 1990s, some of the submarines were scrapped and removed from the water due to concerns about the pollution of the water caused by these ships, although some remain today as seen on Google Earth. Number 4. Chatham Forest Car Graveyard. For a very long time, there were 4 separate car graveyards littered about in the woods around a town called Chatham over in Belgium, but recently they were cleaned up and cleared out. The last of the 4 was wholly cleared in 2010 because they were causing some environmental concerns, which is understandable. And at least we have some great, haunting pictures to serve as a memory of what once was. There were more than 500 different vehicles that collected rust and moss over time, and legend had it that they were left there by U.S. soldiers from the Second World War who couldn't get them home. Many of the cars were stolen over time, and many more had parts torn from them, but we guess that's what happens when they're ditched on public land. These photos hold an air of a post-apocalyptic world. Number 3. RAF Bulking. This next vehicle boneyard can be found in Lincolnshire, UK, and actually started out its days as a decoy airfield to draw attention away from RAF Spitalgate. This place was creepy. It had fake planes and personnel and everything, but it was eventually given to the US in 1944 and then given back to the RAF in April of 1945. It was then shut down in 1947, and British Racing Motors used the runways at the site as a test track. It was reopened yet again in 1959 by the RAF and used for Thor thermonuclear missile testing, and then closed again in 1963. Nelson M. Green & Sons Limited now own the site, and they use the airfield to store tons of old, broken-down vehicles that are kept for spare parts. Now, cranes, tractors, bulldozers, and all sorts of other vehicles can be found there, stored alongside armored vehicles and ex-military lorries from the Second World War. They just lie in wait of their fate, whatever that may be. Number 2. Arizona Boneyard. Also known as Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, this boneyard is a massive storage yard for military aircraft, and it's located pretty deep within the Arizona desert. More than 4,200 military planes call this amazing place home, and those planes, taken as a whole, are worth more than $35 billion. There are 4 different sections in the boneyard, each of which corresponds to the shape of and intention for the planes. In one section, there are preserved and still flyable planes. In another, there are planes that can strictly be used for spare parts. In the third section, one finds planes that are in pretty good shape and may be redeployed one day, and in the fourth, planes that may become museum pieces or scrap can be found. The dry weather in the desert provides the ideal location for the storage of these planes, considering a lack of moisture helps to prevent decay. The boneyard is super famous, and if you feel like it, you can go and tour the place and see the fantastic aircraft for yourself. Number 1. Chernobyl. We all know the name, or we all totally should, but did you know that the nuclear accident that happened back in 1980 caused many a vehicle to be sent to their graves early? Since the disaster occurred, many of the cars, trucks, and helicopters that assisted in the cleanup and firefighting efforts have had to be retired due to crazy amounts of radiation absorption. Most of them have been sitting in vast car boneyards and have been waiting to see what fate has in store for them. The largest of these is at Rosoka, which holds many vehicles that have extremely high radiation readings. Not all of them were able to be kept out in the open in the aftermath of Chernobyl, though, as the fire trucks that were the first to arrive at the scene had to be buried deep within the ground to attempt to control the insane radiation levels. In most of the vehicle graveyards, the firefighting helicopters that were used, the same helicopters whose pilots and crew were terribly affected by radiation, can be found, and it's not unusual to see people attempting to scrap or completely steal these helicopters. and other vehicles, even though there are significant risks in doing so. Yeah, no. Who knew there were so many old vehicles just rotting away, be it because they're old, forgotten, or poisoned by radiation? If this video was up your alley, help us by clicking the like button. Leave us a comment below, hit subscribe if you want to, and keep watching for new videos from us every day.